Okay, today we're going to talk about these finger independence exercises. I'm giving them away. I'm going to do a quick lesson on them. I've been giving these exercises out to my students lately, and the reason why is they cover a lot of details in technique that many students miss. After many years of playing, a lot of students who don't progress very much, often they're missing a lot of very minor details in the technique that needs to be addressed. And these exercises are to address those minor details. So reading from the PDF, it says, these exercises are designed to help you learn about wrist-arm positioning, preparation of fingers, resting fingers on non-vibrating strings, and lifting fingers without releasing their shape. I started the exercise actually as that. That was the first idea, was I wanted people to learn to pick up their fingers without releasing the shape of the fingers. That was my first intention. And then as I wrote them out, I realized there were these other factors in the exercise which really needs to also be understood. Let's go through the other points. Number 2, although all the examples are on strings 6 and 3, you can put these exercises on any other strings to make them easier or more difficult. So, although the exercises are on strings 6 and 3, you could also put them on 5 and 3, right? Or 4 and 3, or 6 and 1, if you wanted to. Okay? Sounds a little bit like Eyes Wide Shut. All right. The third point in the exercise, you should lift your fingers which are not being used, but be careful not to release the shape. So when we get into the shifting part of this exercise, some of the students have asked me, well, is it okay if I just keep my fingers down? And it's okay. If it was a piece, it'd be okay. However, the point of these exercises is to learn how to release your fingers without releasing the shape of the fingers, which a lot of people have a problem with. When people lift their fingers, they often relax the fingers as well as lift them. This is not about total relaxation. This is just about lifting. So when you get into the shifting, it would be best to learn to shift without holding those fingers down, right? And on the way back, same thing. Okay, point 4, you should also rest your fingers on any adjacent non-vibrating strings, which means any string that's not vibrating. In this case, the 5th string and the 4th string is not vibrating, and the 2nd string is not vibrating. So any of those strings, and the 1st string is not vibrating, right? So any of those strings I'm allowed to touch to make things more comfortable for myself, right? So I allow my fingers to be flatter, right? Or in the second exercise, it's this, right? Now I don't mean that. I don't mean that flat. But I mean like when you land, be on your tip, but don't land like this, because these strings are not vibrating. The 5th string is not vibrating. The 2nd string is not vibrating. So you're allowed to just relax your fingers onto those strings, okay? So anywhere you have adjacent strings which are not vibrating, allow your fingers to rest against them. You'll find things a lot easier than playing completely on your tips all the time. And then finally, the 5th point, it is advised to play the first 3 examples before attempting the shifting exercises. Now, if you're more advanced, you can go on to the shifting exercises. But for most students that are having problems with this in the beginning, with the beginning exercises, don't shift right away. Just work on the beginning exercises until you get the point, which is to keep the shape the same even though you've lifted your fingers. All right, so the first exercise, it says left wrist arm position. In other words, I'm going to turn my wrist to the left, right? Not like this. I'm going to turn my wrist to the left so that these fingers align. Okay? And 1 and 2 are down, and I get 3 and 4 ready, and I press them. And as I press 3 and 4, I lift 1 and 2. However, I don't release the shape of 1 and 2, right? The shape, I'm still right over the strings I just played. right? Common mistake is to do this, right? To let these fingers relax because our attention is only on the fretted fingers. This exercise is, if anything, you have to pay attention much more to the fingers you're not fretting to make sure they're not wildly, well, they wouldn't be wildly, but so that they're not relaxing and just not doing anything. They need to be ready to come back, right? So you can see when I lift 1 and 2, they stay in the vicinity, and when I lift 3 and 4, they stay in the vicinity. There's no movement. The hand is also stable. I'm not doing this, right? It's all one position. And remember, you're to the left and you're allowed to touch the adjacent strings because they're not vibrating. That's true of your pieces too, not just this exercise. Then we have center wrist arm position. So center is where we have this position, right? So I get 4 frets very naturally now. And the second exercise is in the third position, like this. And again, 1 and 2 do not move, and 3 and 4 do not move. Right? Right over the strings, right over the frets. The hand position is stable. Right? So make sure your wrist position was left like this. Make sure it's centered now. Right? My wrist comes to the center, it's not to the left. Center position. And then keep these fingers exactly over where they just were. Don't release the shape. Very difficult for a lot of people to do this. Okay? And then the final one is we turn our wrist to the right. Notice my wrist turns toward toward my head, right? Like toward the guitar more. And that's to help me with the 4-3 stretch, especially 4. But 2 and 1 are like this, and then 4 and 3 like that. And again, when you lift, you don't lose the shape. 1 and 2, the same. 4 and 3, the same. There's no movement. Lifting without moving. Very important concept to understand. Okay, so resting is very misunderstood by a lot of people. A lot of people think resting means that you get to release your fingers, but that's not really the case many times. If I were to release here, right? Yes, these fingers would be resting, but it would take me twice as much work now to get back to where I was. So it's not efficient resting. Right? It's not efficient moving. So we have to be very aware that when we're doing something like this where we're alternating, coming back and forth, we have to make sure that our motion is efficient. It's rested, but it's got to be efficient. Not just rested and relaxed and it does whatever it wants. It has to be disciplined because we keep coming back to the same spot. Okay? And then we have the extended exercises, which are with shifts. And those exercises, the first one is a chromatic exercise. And we start with F and A flat. And we're just going to go up chromatically. And, you know, if you get confused, it's just whatever the last fret is, you go up 1 from there, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And as we shift, the wrist doesn't change. And the finger shapes don't change. Forgive the car alarm. Notice how I shift here. There's no movement in the wrist and in the fingers. Okay? If it's difficult for you to do that, check that your hand position is such that you can grab all the notes at once comfortably. If you're trying to do this like this, where the wrist is out like this, it's going to be very uncomfortable. And in fact, when you release, your fingers are going to want to drop down because your wrist is low. But if you keep your wrist very tight, very close, like a jazz player, like a rock player would, then you'll notice that this keeps the position for the fingers close, and keeping your fingers close is not a problem. So you can see my thumb protruding greatly behind the neck of the guitar, all that is legal. There's no problem there with any of that. This position is correct for reaching these notes and must be learned. Okay, and then we go to the second exercise, center wrist arm position. So I'm in the center, and in this case, the exercise is whole tones. So we go, if we just look at the bass, F to G, and then we switch to A, and then to B, and then we go to C sharp, and D sharp, and back down. Okay? Again, notice that there's no change in the fingers. The fingers, although they're lifted, they don't lose their shape. And the wrist doesn't change either. I'm just moving my arm. All right, and then the last one is turning your wrist and your arm to the right a little bit, right? And then the same thing, it's a whole tone scale. So in the bass, we start with G flat, A flat, and then we go to B flat, C, and D, and the final one, E and F sharp. Now this one is very difficult for a lot of people to get. Notice how flat my fourth finger is. I'm allowed to be that flat, and the reason why it's not interfering with the third string here is because the third string is depressed. So even though it looks like my fourth finger is touching the third string is not being interfered with because the fourth finger still has a slight arch and the third string is being pushed down underneath it, right? So if you feel like that's hard to get, let your fourth finger relax more and just curl more with your third finger. Now we go back and we keep that shape and we keep that shape. Again, we lift, but we keep the shape. Lift, keep the shape. Lift, and keep the shape. And back down. Let your fingers be nice and flat on the bass with all these exercises. Right? Not on your tips. We're not doing this. You could try it if you want. However, this is not, you don't need to do that because you're not playing these adjacent strings, right? So as long as you're not playing adjacent strings, you can relax against them, which is what I'm doing here in the bass especially. Okay, I tried to choose intervals that were more pleasant. I know sometimes exercises can sound very ugly, so hopefully these intervals are somewhat pleasant to work with. And like it said in the beginning, in the intro, you can do these on different strings. So if you find that this is too big of a stretch for you, instead of doing it on 6 and 3, do it on 5th and 3rd string, right? Or 4th and 2nd string. That'd be fine. And even with that, you have an adjacent string which is not being played. If I do the 5th string, right, I can still rest my fingers because I'm not playing the 4th string here, right? So be very aware that you can rest your fingers, that your hand position should be allowed to relax because you don't need to be way up with your wrist to get your fingers on your tips. This is not about playing on your tips. This is about playing comfortably, okay? And I would say that with all technique. It's not about following a rule. It's about playing comfortably. And many times you're going to have to break rules you've been taught to play more comfortably and, to get more accuracy. Okay? So this is the exercise for today, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it helps your technique. It's been a good one for my students, so hopefully it'll be the same for you. Good luck, and don't strain yourself. If you start hurting yourself, please stop. Don't keep going. Look for a more comfortable hand position, and then once you find the more comfortable hand position, then move forward with the exercise. Okay? Good luck.